All right, we are recording. Here we are. It is May 3rd. Can you believe it? It's already May 3rd. My gosh, the year's almost half over. I don't know if you have the same experience that I do, but it's January and then it's June. You know, where does the rest of the year go? It's January and then it's June. Every year it seems to happen that way. It's crazy. So here we are on May 3rd, and we're going to be starting we actually did start. We got one paragraph into the third conversation starting on page 33, but we're going to go back to the top just so we can get a running start at everything. So before we jump in, was there anything that anybody wanted to lead off with tonight? Anything that's been on your minds? You can ask about anything and everything except cooking and architecture. I don't know anything about those subjects. Bill does, but not me. Okay. Nothing? We're cleared for takeoff? Okay, let's start on page 33 then. Third conversation, November 22nd, 1666. So this is Joseph de Beaufort, I think is the way you would pronounce it if you're trying to do French, speaking to Brother Lawrence. And Brother Lawrence tells him that the foundation of his spiritual life had been a high idea and esteem of God through faith. And once he had understood this, he immediately rejected every other consideration that he might perform all his activities for the love of God. Then when he had not thought of him for quite a while, he did not let it bother him. But after having acknowledged his wretchedness to God, he returned to him with even more confidence for having suffered such misery in forgetting him so. And we spent a fair amount of time last week talking about that last sentence, both about the wretchedness, his continual self-deprecation, tucking himself down, bordering on low self-esteem, and Catholic culture of the time, and so on and so forth. And we talked about maybe substituting, instead of wretchedness for our ears, frailty, after having acknowledged his frailty to God, his just predilection for failure, that sort of thing, rather than wretchedness in such a negative sense. He returned to him with even more confidence for having suffered such misery in forgetting him. And we talked about why that should be, and I think Scott was the one who jumped on it first, but the idea that his sense of wretchedness and for having spent a certain amount of time not even thinking about God, having lost a sense of his presence, was actually kind of a proof of his love for God. And so when he did return to thoughts of him, when he did return to a sense of presence, he was even more confident in God's reconnection with him, because of the misery that he suffered from having been separated for a period of time. And so we're getting more and more looks into Brother Lawrence's psyche as we go. And I know that through these conversations and into the letters, there'll be a lot of repetition of certain themes and ideas and concepts. But this is kind of the nature of this book, not being a book so much as a collection of bits and pieces. All of that he's talking to here in this first paragraph of the third conversation, but even what he was leading to at the end of the second conversation, was all leading toward trust. And Patricia jumped on that last week, that it was all about trust for her, and it's all about trust for Brother Lawrence as well. And this is the last bit that we read last week, that next sentence, that the trust we put in God honors him greatly and draws down on us great graces. So for Brother Lawrence, it's going to end up all being about trust. And have any of you read, first of all, Brennan Manning? Are you familiar with him as an author? He was one of the Holy Trinity of me when I first got started reading along these lines. There was Thomas Merton, there was Henry Nouwen, and Brennan Manning. And we have done book studies on all three of those over the last few years. And Brennan Manning, the book that we read through together was called Ruthless Trust. I don't know if some of you remember that one or not, but it was all about trust and how trust was the most important element and place for us to get as children of God. But there's a great line that Brennan Manning had in Ruthless Trust. He said that it's much easier to say I love you than it is to say I trust you. I want you to think about that for just a second. He said it's much easier to say I love you than it is to say I trust you. Do you agree with that statement?
Implicitly, I do.
Implicitly?
Without
and if you're going to answer, you have to say why. You have to show your work, John. So,
sir, yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead.
In my my early in my 20s, there was a person that I was intensely with whom I was intensely involved and loved her a great deal, wanted to marry her. Discovered after a short period of time, and now over all the, after all these years, 50 some odd years later, that I don't know that she was worthy of my trust. And so to be able to say I trust her was out of the question. Now, fast forward to today, I will say without hesitation that I am truly married, and I absolutely trust my partner. I mean, she has earned my trust, and she continues to show that on a daily basis. Not with large things, that too, but just on daily stuff we do. That's a huge difference in what my experience has been in the past. And it occurred to me that over the years that in some of the relationships that I had, quote unquote, developed with women, was that I may have been highly attracted to, or even, if you will, in love with, but never realized that I never trusted them. And that's changed today.
Okay.
That has absolutely changed today. And everything my wife says, everything she says and does, it's kind of like we're in the same canoe rowing in the same direction, which is a neat deal. And I've never experienced that on a long, on an extended period, extended base of time. Whereas before, that would be the initial stuff. But when push came to shove, it was, that canoe was going under.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, you know what? I have my part in it as well. But I sure, as it come, when it came down to it, the trust issue was not there.
So whether the relationship is romantic or anything, whether it's familial, friendship, or whatever, is it easier to say I love you than I trust you? Anyone
Absolutely.
else have a thought about that? And why, if that's true? Or why not?
I'm thinking about when I was a teenager, and I think my parents always loved me, but they didn't always. They just didn't. I mean, there may have been something I said I was going to do, and maybe I didn't do it just right, or maybe fibbing a little bit about staying out late for this or that or whatever. So there might have been some moments where they didn't trust me, but I think they always loved me. So maybe maybe that changes over time.
Mhm. So it was easier for them to say, I love you than I trust you to you.
Probably. At
Okay,
some time or other. Yeah.
okay.
I'd add for myself that when I gained a level of trust in myself, uh, that I began to demand at the very least that level of trust in someone else.
Judy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was. I've been thinking about this. I do think it's easier to say I love you than I trust you. And part of it, I think for me, my journey has been to trust myself and believe in myself. And part of that journey was influenced by, alcoholism in my family and the disease component of that I took with me throughout my life. And I think being married, I think I came in with a particular untrusting nature because of my background. And I think there were times that I had learned over time where I could trust my husband and where I couldn't rely on him for different things. And I think that left me kind of uncertain as to his trustworthiness. And mind you, he's always been devoted and faithful and has done all of those things. But I think for me, my journey was to become more comfortable with me and to learn how to trust myself. Because there was a long period in my life where I was second guessing myself, and self-doubt was in the play, and colored so much of my work experience and my home life that until I got to the point that I'm at recently, probably within the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, I've been able to extend that trust to him and realize that he may still disappoint me or fall short of my expectations, but I've learned how to believe and see that my expectations can set him up for failure in both my own eyes and his own eyes. So I don't know if that fully answers your question. But it was kind of colored by a two-part interchange between the two of us, over time.
Yeah.
And the stick-to-itiveness that each of us brought to the relationship and suffered through some really rocky roads. It's gotten so much better, I think, for each of us. Yeah.
First of all, I have a comment about that. First of all, my first statement is, so what? I mean, so what? Love is hard to give, trust harder to give than love. And then there's a passage of scripture that comes to mind that love covers a multitude of sins, right? That love covers a many colored, distrustful situation has been just described. And I appreciate the work on that. Thanks for the sharing. Appreciate that. And the sensitivity to being willing to work through things is very important in a relationship of any quality. And so that the quality is there, but there's a saying that without equality, there's very little capacity for love anyway. So without trust being there at some point, that's going to be lost, no matter how much love is there. But if there is love, then it will cover a multitude of those sins. So my question would be, so what if trust is harder to give than love? I think that's a very convoluted question. but it's a two parts issue has been said. The one has to do with how life has affected us, disease has affected us. And I don't believe that one can have a knowing relationship, quote, loving relationship, interpersonal relationship, when there's a sense of imbalance between two parties, no matter what that imbalance may be: money, property, professional standing, intellectual capacity. That trust can be given a perception of trust when in fact what it is, I trust your money. If you're wealthy, I trust you to be able to take care of me. That's a very easy level of trust. I think you really know if they're really trusting, if that sense of which you talk about, Dave, that sense of your last thing you're hanging on to is an identification of knowing whether you believe in God is, if you're hanging on to something, go and sell everything you have and see if the trust is still there, right? Is the recommendation that we do the last thing we think we need to do and then see if the trust is still there. So if you're wealthy and you're in a relationship which trust is very easy, then you're broke. Are you just as trusting as one another when you're broke as when you're wealthy? So I think the way to know that is when you test the edge of that inequality. So that's my thought.
Okay. Well, before we answer the so what question, let's is there anybody here who flat out doesn't agree with the statement that it's easier to say I love you than I trust you?
I mean,
Okay.
I
Go,
kind
Allison.
of don't. I mean, I kind of do a note because I'm sitting here contemplating what everyone else is saying. But if I truly love someone, I'm trusting you with that. But I also get where it's like I can like surface level love another being or like another person, but like, hey, my brother, I don't trust you because you're gonna hit me with that ball in the face. I get where that's going, but like underneath it all, like if I think about if like for me, like before life happens, like Bond was just saying, for me, like even as like a child, like trust and love are pretty like they that's just for me. But I mean, I can kind of teeter-totter both ways, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
I when Judy was sharing and talking about this trust in self, and as it pertains to, is it easier to love God than to trust God? I don't know if I can say definitively that I trust God. And I don't know if it's because I'm approaching this thing from an intellectual space, or maybe there's too much ego that's still there. It's like there's part of me that doesn't expect anything from God. Right? And maybe I trust in that sense, like I'm not going to be disappointed. But but I don't really, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but I don't know if trust is the right word for my relationship with God at this point.
That's insightful, William. I hang on to that thought for a second. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ellen.
Yeah, I kind of agree with William because I have the same thing. I love God and I trust God will be there when I need comfort and guidance. He will send messengers. However, if I have a flat tire, I don't trust God that he will change the tires for me. Either I will do it, or I will call somebody, or I'll call AAA. Because I think for me, I have difficulty trusting God 100%. Because over the years, as a child, young adult, older adult, I had trusted on myself to go through things like in college. We were poor. I paid for my college, so I can do it. And I grew up, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cudahy, Southgate, Huntington Park area of LA. I grew up there.
Mhm.
And I learned to protect myself.
Mm.
And I even stared down this, this guy who's, I don't know, this stupid punk kid with a bandana, he's a cholo. And now I look back, I said, oh my God, you were 12 years old and you stared down this stupid punk. It gave me a lot of confidence.
Mm.
But if I didn't come up with that, I don't know, a personality or this, my therapist said you have a warrior mentality. And I agree, actually.
Mm.
But God will not be there to put his body between me and him. It has to be me.
Mm.
Stare down at him and he backed away. I said, oh my gosh, that's power.
Mm.
Now, there are circumstances I cannot control, obviously. Right? So that's where you surrender. But this is also my thing ever since we have talked about trust and surrender. I will surrender only when I've done the best I can and I know, okay, this is yours now. I've done the best I can. I can be at peace and say I did the best I can. And that's when I'll be at peace.
Mm.
And that's easy to surrender. But before that, I cannot.
Don't you all just want to see 12-year-old Ellen staring that guy down?
No.
I want to see a picture of that. That's great.
They're fierce.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in here before we
There's a
kind
sentence
of
that's
wrap
going
this up?
around.
Go ahead, Scotty.
There's a sentence that's going around in my head. I can't really complete it yet. I've tried to complete it a couple times in silence, but I'm going to throw it out there and maybe you guys can comment on it, or maybe it's just good as a standalone. I keep hearing in my head that love is something that I give to someone. Trust is something they earn from me. I
Okay.
don't know what that's supposed to mean because I'm not been here quiet for 5 or 10 minutes trying to come up with why is that thought in my head, but
Mm.
let's speak it out. And if it means something to somebody, great. If it doesn't, well, let's move on.
Right.
Yeah. Well, here's just everything that you guys said is valid and important, and it's part of the process that each one of us needs to go through to come out at the other side of this. I do think it's an important distinction to make, and I do think there is a so what in there. So maybe we'll answer that question. Maybe not to Vaughn's satisfaction, but we'll try. We'll try. And I think that the reason is I happen to agree with the statement. And the reason is that to say I love you can be a conceptual process. It can be something that we love someone or something because of the image that we have in our mind. But it won't necessarily cost us anything. I mean, I think at a certain point, what Allison said is true, that love and trust become one and the same. But I think at the beginning of the process, not necessarily so. And the difference to me is that, as Scotty said, trust has to be earned. In other words, it's experiential. It's not just conceptual. It's not something that we can just say and will ourselves to trust. Our body knows the difference. Somatically, we're going to know the difference. If the anxiety remains, right, if the stress remains, then we're not trusting no matter how much we may protest that we do. And so what trust actually requires is vulnerability and risk. Until we risk something with the other, give them something that is of great value to us. It doesn't have to be ultimate value, start small. But until we risk something that we value and it comes back to us, we're not going to trust that person. And so once again, the descent before the ascent. We can say I love you without taking a descent. But we can't say I trust you and mean it until we have actually descended, taken the risk, become vulnerable, and come out the other side.
Mm.
And so, yes, I think it is easier to say I love you than I trust you. For that very reason, we have to let our defenses down in order to find out if someone or something is trustworthy. And the capstone to what Brennan Manning said was, it's easier to say I love you than I trust you. And it means much more to God for us to say, I trust you, than I love you, to him. Because that means we've taken a journey with him. That means we've made ourselves vulnerable and we've actually experienced something with our God. An exchange has taken place. And to the extent that William may say he's not sure he trusts God, well, has William made himself vulnerable enough to actually go through that process and come out the other side? And I'm not casting any aspersions either way. That's just an open question. And it's really for any one of us. You know, it's very facile to just say, I trust God, but have we really gone through the process? And is our life still characterized by anxiety and stress? Or have we gotten to a place of a certain amount of contentment? That's not to say ecstasy, but what characterizes Brother Lawrence is an amount of contentment, bottom line contentment. He's not worried about heaven and hell anymore. He's not worried about his own frailty and wretchedness anymore, because he trusts God so much that just lets all of that, the air out of those other tires and balloons or whatever, because he's come to a place of trust. But he had to do it through the crucible of those first 4 years, remember, where he thought he was going to hell. And then the next 6 or so where he was fighting with himself in the kitchen and the resentment and everything else. So through that process, he came out to a place of trust, but he had to take that journey. And so I think there is a distinction to be made, and it's something at least to consider. And you can consider it in your own personal relationships, you know, from marriages to children to friends. And also we can consider it in our relationship with God.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, Dave.
I knew that. I knew that.
Thanks for having my back, buddy.
You were on it, Scott. You were on it.
I was close.
Any further thoughts after I said my piece?
You know, in all the years in between, shall I say, then and now, in my lowest or loneliness or darkest times in my life, and there were those periods that were dark. The one thing I did, the one thing I had was I've always trusted God, and even in my lowest of times, in my opinion of myself, you know, my deeds or lack thereof, or the kinds of deeds, I knew that God trusted that. I knew God would take care of me. I've always believed that. And, you know, call me, you know, my name should have been Paul or Paulie, like Pollyanna. But I have always had that belief that God would take care of me, that he loved me. I've had that trust in him. And as it says here in the book, that the trust we put in God honors him greatly and draws down on us great graces. Well, you know, I've always, without fail, had a deep trust and abiding faith. And I'm not speaking religiously, you know, and for many years it was in spite of that religion. You know what I'm talking about. We've been
Yeah, I did.
Conversation before, and you know, and of course that's what I love so much about what we're doing here. That's been an incredibly huge breakthrough for me, to recognize that you know, that trust that I had. And I've always said, and somebody said it earlier, that trust is earned. I even in public seminars that I used to do when I was trying to sell financial products, you know, I always, you know, I would say, you don't know me, the guy next to you, you don't know me. And I want you to know the trust is earned. And my job is to earn your trust. Well, that was my professional thing. But, you know, God's job was to let me know that he was trustworthy. And that was an easy thing for me. I've always trusted him. I didn't always trust those who would purvey, who purported to purvey his his gospel to me. But in short, I would just say, in my deepest, darkest moments, I always knew that God was there, and all I had to do was ask him.
Well, you're a better man than I am, Gungadin. Because I'll tell you, I didn't trust God at all. It's been a long, bloody street brawl for me to get to the point that I can say I trust God. Now it's been, it was a good 10 years for me, where I was just as neurotic as I was when I started the process. I was just as fearful, and it was a long, long time before I felt any kind of breakthrough into trust. But when I look back on it now, I realize what I was doing was becoming more and more stripped down as I went, becoming more and more open and vulnerable and kind of flayed out, because I was to the end of myself. But it was tough. And my depression and my anxiety, the choices that I was making through my 20s and 30s were proof that I didn't trust, anything or anyone. So it was a tough battle for me. So I really understand this statement and why it makes a difference to me, because until I was completely vulnerable and open, could I experience the trustworthiness of God. And it's something that wasn't like the changing of a tire, as Ellen so eloquently put. It wasn't that kind of trust that I developed in God. It was a deeper abiding presence that I have come to realize will not leave me, even though I may not be aware of it at the moment. Kind of the same exact thing that Lawrence is saying on this page right here.
I, going back to, Judy's comment, I have a deep sense that no matter how things turn out, I'm gonna be okay. And I don't know if that's trust in God, but I'm good with that. That works for me. Yeah.
I think that is trust, William. I think that's exactly what it is. It's not going to be a feeling of certainty. It's certainly not with me. It's not going to be a feeling that you've got it all worked out, or that someone isn't lurking behind the next corner. But what you just said, that basic sense of okayness, somehow, some way, in the final analysis, I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And then the rest kind of ebbs and flows and oscillates because we're human.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. I mean, it's I felt so blessed, I think, when I finally got to a point, and it came after some bleakest moments that when I was faced with, real uncertainty about where my life was going. But at the same time, I did feel the same sense of, I'm going to be okay, regardless of what happens. And that, I hadn't thought about this before, but I think it kind of paralleled my journey with God. And I don't think I could have done that. I did my part, but there was an experiential component that I consistently started having in my relationship with God. And I think that really helped me just feel grounded and centered. And it was outside of life circumstances, at that point. They that there was big question marks all around me. But I somehow had gotten to that point. And I think all of the things that we talk about in our community about contemplation and meditation and all of that, it does work. And you see the effects. For me, I know I only saw the effects over time. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with Dave, it's like, why don't I see an outcome? When I first started practicing, he looked at me with such understanding, and he said, you don't get an outcome, girl. Not right away. It kind of comes over time and with immersion. Yeah, but it is linked. I think it is linked to, you know, our how we deal with our life situations, and how we meld our relationship with God, and over time there's just a contentment of feeling like it's going to be okay. That Julian of Norwich, you know, it's going to be well with my soul.
Mhm.
Well, and some of this isn't, I mean, I'm kind of seeing it also. My mother still says today, when somebody's going in for surgery or you're going under the knife of a surgeon or something, you know, she always says, we've done all we can. You are now in the hands of God. You know, so she kind of has that resignation, and I understand that. It's kind of like, now it's up to God. So that's a level of trust, really. But to me,
Yes,
it's also a
acceptance.
level of what we talked about, of a surrender. I guess trust is kind of a surrender, because
Yeah.
you're saying it is what it is. It's probably going to be okay. I have to let it go. I have to let go of control of this.
Yeah.
Now it's in the hands of God. So I have to trust that. But it is a kind of surrender at the same time, I think.
I think
Oh,
that's a
big
great
time.
insight, Kathy, that
Yeah.
trust, I'd say trust is the result of surrender.
Right.
We
Mm,
finally surrender,
that's a good
and
point.
the person and what we have risked comes back to us, then that's where the trust is actually experienced and born. But yes, we have to absolutely surrender. We have to let it go. You know, I think I told you guys a story when Megan, our 32-year-old now, when we were first coming to church, when, you know, in the church that Scott and I were with, I'd go early because I was part of the worship team, of course, right? And Megan, who was probably, I don't know, 10, 11 at the time, always wanted to come with me. So we'd go early, and she'd hang out by the soundboard with Gene the dancing machine. That was what I called him anyway. And she'd tool around and have all sorts of fun. Well, one Sunday, she forgot something in the car, and she said, Dad, I need to get into the car. Give me the car keys. And I'm thinking, there's no way in hell I'm giving you these car keys. You know, I know what's going to happen if I give car keys to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or whatever she was at the time. So I walked out with her and got what she needed out of the car. Well, a couple Sundays later, she needed the car keys again. So I thought about it, and I gave her the big dad lecture. Okay, I'm going to give you these keys, but you know what? I want you to go out, unlock the door, get your thing, come right, lock the door, come right back and give these keys. And I'm watching her the whole time, right? And then she gives me back the car keys. Within a few weeks, I'm just tossing the keys to her, you know, across the room. She had proven herself trustworthy to me. And so it's like, that's the process of I had to risk my car keys to find out that my daughter was trustworthy and would bring them back. You know?
Yeah.
But that's the way it works. And first of all, we have to let down our defenses enough to be able to risk the first little thing with somebody. And when that comes back, we can risk a little more and a little more. And I think at the end of that process, then what Allison was saying becomes true, that our love and our trust become one and the same thing. They become two sides of the same coin, but they're not that way at the beginning. I think through the experience, they finally come together, or not. It depends on the quality of the other. But that's the process. And that's what I experienced in my walk with God, why this is so important to me. And it may not be as important to you. You may not have had the same experience. And maybe this distinction is a so what to you, but it's not to me. And obviously it wasn't to Brennan Manning either, who was an alcoholic and had a lot to deal with in his life. So that's it. You know, hopefully the half hour plus that we've spent on this is not, you know, totally irrelevant to you.
We trust it'll end at some point.
Exactly.
But these
Before we
are.
move on, Dave, I just wanted to share something too along those lines.
Oh, absolutely.
Just listening to everyone, like you said, I find that trust is a a means of surrender is a condition of the heart. I remember going through, as it relates to trusting God, we all have the moments of when we're trusting in Him, then when we're not. I remember where I was writing a song where it went, teach my heart to trust in you, Lord, in everything that I do. And then it pointed me back to that part of scriptures where I remember saying to Him, when we look at nature, basically, it seems as though it's easier for nature to trust Him when he told us about the birds on the wing and how, they don't worry about where they get their food from, and then the flowers and stuff like that. So, and even if you have pets, yes, you can find with dogs that sometimes if you're cruel to them, they can't leave that trust. But outside of humanity, you look at nature, they tend to have a more trusting nature towards God than we do. And I think that that's what kind of grounded me and brought me back when I started to think about trusting. And it was like, Lord, give me that trusting heart, because when I look at these birds, it's because of you that they sing. You provide their food, oh Lord, each day. And when you look at the flowers and how they bloom, they're even more lovely than Solomon and stuff. And these were things within scripture. And I think it was looking at nature that had me pondering. So Lord, how do I, like these birds, how do I, like nature in general, acquire that kind of heart of trust, and like you guys were saying, it's a matter of surrendering, getting to that place of total surrender before Him.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's great. And great,
really
great
good point.
scriptures to bring to bear too, Anya. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said, down here.
Yeah. We haven't heard, Carol, do you want to throw in here? Just wanted to give you the opportunity in case you've been so quiet and patient all this time.
I trust God that He's always going to be with me no matter what is ahead. And some of it has been really rocky. And the Lord has just shown me to keep my eyes on Him. And my heart can be broken, but I need to keep my eyes on Him and not the circumstance.
Yeah.
That if I keep my eyes on the circumstance and I think about it, I'm gonna like drown.
Yeah.
But I keep my eyes on the Lord, and He goes, Carol, I'm gonna get you through. I'm not gonna make it. Might not be, you might be hanging off a cliff on some days, but I've got you.
Yeah.
And that gets me through. That gets me up in the morning. Like, no matter what, God is going to be with me.
Yeah.
He's never going to leave us. And that is so comforting, because some of us go through some trials.
Yeah.
But He is never going to leave us. We can always hang on to Him, and we lean more into Him through the trials.
Yes.
And it's so sweet, because
It is.
sometimes you think, wow, God, I don't know if I can make this. This journey is getting really hard. And God goes, I got you. Don't take your eyes off me.
Good one, Carol.
I don't know, Carol's starting to sound a lot like Brother Lawrence over there.
Yeah.
It reminds me of I forgot I think the name of the song is Just Be Held. And there's there's a bar in that song that goes, if your eyes are on the storm, you'll wonder if I love you still. But if your eyes are on the cross, you'll know that I always have and I always will.
My question to Carol is, can you put some heels on my shoes?
He's referring to Lawrence as the cobbler.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Took me a second to follow, but I got you, John. I got you. Yeah.
For you, John, but I'm pumped.
Very good. Very good. I think this has been a great discussion, so I'm glad we had it. And I think, Bill and Gail, did you guys want to throw in? Are you even there? Bill and Gail?
They're napping.
Okay. All right, just wanted to check. Don't want to leave anybody out here. So trust.
Here
Oh,
comes
there he
Bill.
is. You want to throw in
Hey,
here,
Bill.
Bill? Have you been monitoring the conversation, buddy?
Yeah, I've been here. We've been just eating my liver and onions like a good boy.
Oh, I love liver and onions. I'm so jealous.
Our weekly liver and onions.
Oh, goodness.
Did you want to throw in on trust there, my friend?
Well, I with people, it's different for me than it is with God, because with people, it's I can trust somebody's integrity, but I can't always trust their confidence with something. And so I kind of set that off to the side. But with God, that one's harder. I'm kind of at a point in my life where I am sorting through how much of the nice Christian sayings that I've been told I'm supposed to think about when things are tough and this and that. I'm finding less value in those. But what you guys were sharing about the verse of fixing your eyes on Jesus, so I just continue to make a choice to lean my ladder in that direction and continue to keep trusting in that. And I'll find out at the end of my life whether I've trusted in the right, I've had the right focus, and the 23rd Psalm, when you're at a funeral, you can realize that God really is there during those times. At least if he isn't, he sure feels like he is. And the birds of the air and the lilies of the field not toiling and spinning. For me, humanly speaking, I need to keep focused on those things.
Celeste Gordon.
I know that they're the best path for me, but the trusting, I don't know. I don't trust him in the same way with my circumstances like I used to think I should, because there's been so much disappointment in the expectations. I've said, if I do this, God will do that. And he doesn't, the way I think he should. So my trust isn't so much in falling down on what God may or may not be doing, but it's the trust that I put in things that aren't probably lined up with his way. And Dave, your book in the chapter on contract we have with God, I mean, I've really been unraveling a lot of stuff that maybe I've legitimately leaned my ladder in God's direction, but I think I've misunderstood much of it, that if I do this, God's going to do this as an outcome, and it's just not like that. And just continuing to make a choice to follow his way as best as I understand, and not really the church's way or what anybody else is telling me, but trying to hear his voice in that quietness of when I'm aware of him. Trying to embrace life, kind of what you've been talking about lately, about accepting life on life's terms, and that just because I believe in Jesus, it doesn't mean that my life's going to go easier, because it doesn't.
So is it easier for you to say you love God than it is to say I trust God?
Just because that word saying that I love somebody, I really can love somebody without them being able to perform what I think they should do.
Right. Yeah.
So there's an unconditional part of that I'm loving.
Yep.
I have to be mindful of not letting performance affect the truth of how I love them or not.
Yeah. I have a sense sometimes that God says he loves me until I trust him, right?
I don't know. There's so much of the time I just feel like I don't have much choice.
I guess.
I have to make a choice.
Well,
and I've made a choice, and I continue to make a choice that, God, you're going to continue to keep showing me your way, and I keep seeking that. And Scripture can enlighten that, and sometimes it can, my understanding of it can set me off on a wrong tangent.
Absolutely. Yeah. I find myself finding myself, whether I trust God or not, I find him consistently loving me, right? What I think love looks like. The loving me allows me then to trust him eventually. So that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
William, what you shared, I resonate with the fact that things are just going to be okay.
Mhm.
And in the hard times, John, like you've been sharing, you just have a sense that when you're going through a death of a loved one or whatever it is, there really is a presence there that is comforting and is real. And it just is.
Yeah. I when you were sharing there, it made me think of this the title of the book, Rootless Trust. Where I think, like, if in my understanding, if God shows up disguised as reality, and reality can kick you in the balls every once in a while, right? It's not so much that I'm thinking that God is trustworthy. I'm thinking more I need to like it's like, Dave, when you were talking about this idea that, the highest form of love is love for the enemy, where, like, if you only love somebody because they love you, that's just a reaction. A dog can do that. Translating that idea to trust, I feel like real trust. In fact, the story you shared about your daughter kind of earning your trust, I don't think of that as trust. I think she, I don't know what's the right word I'm looking for, but like the rootless trust is the trust you would have for everyone, right? It's like, I don't know if I'm explaining this properly, but it feels like it's more a function of me trusting rather than believing wholeheartedly that God can be trusted. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it didn't, but that's okay. But you know what? This is what you need to parse through, and I think it's a good starting point. It doesn't matter whether I understand it. It matters whether it makes sense to you and helps you, whether it works for you in your journey, and starts to inform you more. For me, I did trust my daughter. Well, not about everything, about the car keys, right? That was the only thing I trusted her about. Doesn't mean I was going to give her my bank account number.
Wants to take over the company.
I just trusted her ability to deal with my car keys. And that's the way it works. We trust one small piece. Don't you all have friends that you can trust them to show up on time, but you're not going to partner in a company with them? There's things that we trust and things that we don't trust. Everybody's a mixed bag. And so that's the way it's going to be. And I think it's the same way with God. We're gonna finally let our guard down, and God's gonna come through, and we trust that portion, but maybe not another and another. So it's it's layers of the onion coming off all the time. And so that's the way the trust is born. But I think over time you can get to a point where you really do give yourself over and trust completely. John talked about the trust that he has for his wife. I think of the trust that I have for Marion. I mean, I can't imagine, trusting another human being as much as I trust Marion. But we've been together for 30 years, and there's been a lot of stuff that we didn't trust, but now we do. And so it's a process. It's a constant refining process. But as long as we're willing to keep becoming vulnerable, the process continues. It's when we finally put up our defenses that the process stops. If we get hurt to the point that we put defenses up and we're too afraid to let them down, then we've lost the process. We are not growing anymore. And so the trust is always going to require that vulnerability, that willingness to get hurt again, because someone's going to hurt you if you give them the opportunity. And we can't know that in advance. So we just have to be willing. And that's the other nature of trust as well.
Yeah.
You know, in these last couple of minutes, I do need to read the next sentence, or the ghost of Frank Billman will haunt me forever, because we will not have gotten any further than we were last week, and that's just not acceptable. So we've been talking about trust here, but this last sentence will cap this off. He says that it was impossible not only that God would deceive, but also that he would permit a soul totally abandoned to him and resolved to endure all for him, to suffer for any appreciable length of time. So listen to what he's saying, that the trust we put in God honors him greatly and draws down upon us great graces. And because of that, it was impossible not only that God would deceive, but also that he would permit a soul totally abandoned to him and resolved to endure all for him, to suffer for any appreciable length of time. Now, I think that we can probably, refute this and break this down even in our own experience. We suffered for long periods of time. But I think the question to ask was, when we were suffering for those long periods of time, whose fault was it? Was that really God causing us to suffer? Or was that us not allowing God's healing presence to take us out of the suffering? Because what God does do is honor our free choice, right? But what he's saying, in his trust had gotten to the point that he believed that it was impossible for God to deceive. God would never, ever lead him down a wrong path, gaslight him, use deception even as a teaching tool or for any other reason. It was impossible for God to deceive because he was truth, living truth. He was love. He was forgiveness. He was all those things. So deception in God is impossible. So he didn't have to worry about that anymore. And then the second piece of that is that he wouldn't permit a soul who is totally abandoned and sold out to him to suffer for any length of time. Now, if you want to extend that to hell, then I think it's absolutely true. God is not the kind of God who is going to put us in hell and then lock the door and throw away the key. Now, I don't know that that's what he's talking about, or if he's talking about the suffering that we experience in this life or what. But I think the bottom line here for Brother Lawrence is he was completely and totally in trust with God, as well as in love with God. And that's something that we do want to try to emulate. But the only way that you get there is by allowing yourself to become hurtable. As long as we're defended, we will never experience trustworthiness of anything or anyone, including God. But if we're willing to be hurtable, then we will find out who's trustworthy and who's not. And eventually, as Carol eloquently said, God is always going to come out on the trustworthy side. But we won't know that, and it won't reduce our stress and our fear in life until we've experienced it.
I've heard it said before that our choice to suffer is a choice. And for me, oftentimes I have to dial it back when I'm in that place, and bemoaning my circumstances or what have you, that what expectations do I have in my head about what should have been done? Am I still trying to prescribe an answer to God that I wanted to see happen? Or is there a way that I can see purpose in the way that things have evolved and look at it, I think as you were saying, like as a way to heal me in a deeper way and to draw me closer, even closer to him.
Amen.
Yeah, Dave, I was thinking of, I couldn't find a quote from Lao Tzu, but he was saying something along the lines of, when you can trust someone who is trustworthy, and when you can trust someone who is not trustworthy, that is true trust. And I think I was making I was trying to connect that to true love. Like when you love somebody who is lovable and you love somebody who is not lovable, that is true love.
Mm.
And so like for example, my mom, you have to earn her trust. And my experience of her is that she's not a trusting person. You know, by virtue, because you have to earn it, it suggests that she's not trusting.
Alexander Gordon.
Whereas, you know, I trust people, I think, until they betray my trust.
Guilty till proven innocent, right?
Right. Guilty until proven innocent versus, yes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the way it is for every single one of us. You know, about trusting an untrustworthy person, I would say the willingness to extend trust to an untrustworthy person is the practice of trust. But the willingness, again, to be vulnerable, to risk something, to give extend the benefit of the doubt to someone. And if they have proven themselves untrustworthy, being willing to give them another chance and see. At a certain part, your discretion has to kick in and you have to realize, you know, I cannot continue to be in this type of relationship with this person because it is too dysfunctional, too toxic, and it's too damaging, you know. But you might find other ways to be able to be in relationship with that person, then you just avoid that one untrustworthy spot. But I get what you're saying in that quote. I mean, it's approaching the love of the enemy type of idea, right? If you can love those that are unlovely, can you trust those who are untrustworthy? Well, I don't know that you can in the same way, but you can at least not shut the door on them, and you can allow other chances and allow yourself to keep returning to that spot and hoping that a change has occurred. And I think that's a healthy place to be. Any rate, this has been our discussions over the last few weeks and months have just really gone off the hook. Great discussions. So thanks everyone for throwing in on this. I know we only got one sentence ahead in the book, but
We won't tell Frank.
Don't tell Frank. You know, I'll never hear the end of it. You know, at least we didn't go backwards like we did that one week, and I never heard the end of that. So, all right. Great job, everybody. Let's let Christopher and Anya and William go to bed. I think they're the late birds right now. So
absolutely.
Go ahead, Scotty.
Lord, you heard our conversation tonight. You know why we're here. You know what we're up to and what we're trying to figure out. This whole love and trust issue that goes on. I pray right now for all of us, Lord, and anybody going through the same issues, that we're able to just abide our attention 100% in your direction and be sensitive to your guidance and instruction, and just be able to act on it and share it with other people the way he wants us to. So we're actually loving and trusting him, and he helps us to love and trust others through his Holy Spirit. So we thank you, Lord Jesus. It's in your holy and precious name that we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Scotty.
See you Sunday.
Bye. Bye. Night, night.
Night, Judy. See you.
Night, Scott.
Good night, good night, good night.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Good night, you guys. Good night, Linda. Good night, Jordana.
Night. Good night, Dave and Linda. I'll see you guys on Sunday.
See you Sunday. See you Saturday.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night.